It started like any other day. I walked through the door after work, expecting the usual routine: dinner, a quiet evening with my wife, and maybe some TV. But as soon as I stepped inside, I noticed something was off. The air felt heavy, and the faint smell of alcohol lingered in the hallway. I followed the sound of her voice, low and urgent, coming from the bedroom. She was on the phone, her tone soft and intimate. "I miss you too," she whispered, her words slurred slightly. I froze, my heart pounding. Who was she talking to? And why did she smell like alcohol? When she hung up, I walked into the room, my face a mask of calm. Who was that? She jumped, her face flushing. No one. Just a friend. Her words were dismissive, but her eyes avoided mine. Before I could press further, she brushed past me, heading straight for the bathroom. She didn't close the door behind her, and I stood there, unsure of what to do. I heard the water start to run, and then the sound of her struggling. Curiosity, or maybe concern, got the better of me, and I peeked into the bathroom. She was fumbling with the zipper on the back of her dress, her movements clumsy and uncoordinated. She swayed slightly, barely able to keep her balance, and for a moment, it looked like she might fall. "Are you okay?" I asked, stepping into the bathroom. "Do you need help?" She didn't answer right away, her hands still tugging at the fabric. As I moved closer, I noticed something strange. The zipper on the back of her dress was already undone, the fabric gaping open. My eyes flicked downward, and I realized with a sinking feeling that there was no underwear beneath the dress. Why was her dress unzipped? Why was she like this? My mind raced, suspicion creeping in like a shadow. "Leave me alone," she muttered, her voice sharp but unsteady. "I don't need your help. Just let me shower." I stepped back, my thoughts swirling. The smell of alcohol, the late-night phone call, the unzipped dress, it all pointed to something I didn't want to believe. But the pieces were there, and I couldn't ignore them. I left the bathroom, closing the door behind me, but the image of her struggling, the zipper already undone, stayed with me. The trust between us, once solid, now felt fragile, like a thread about to snap. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, while the sound of the shower ran in the background. Sleep didn't come. Instead, my mind replayed the scene over and over, each time deepening the cracks in the foundation of our marriage. By morning, I knew things would never be the same. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting thin stripes across the bedroom. I had barely slept, my mind churning with suspicion and dread. My wife lay beside me, still asleep, her breathing steady and unbothered. The events of the previous night replayed in my head like a broken record: the whispered phone call, the smell of alcohol, the unzipped dress. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Then, her phone lit up on the nightstand. The screen glowed brightly, cutting through the dim room. My eyes flicked to it instinctively. A message notification popped up. "I have time today, let's meet at lunch." The sender's name was Billy. Billy. The name echoed in my mind, sharp and accusatory. I glanced at my wife, still asleep, her face peaceful in a way that felt almost mocking. My hand hovered over the phone, torn between respect for her privacy and the gnawing need to know the truth. The tension in the room was suffocating. Finally, I reached for the phone. It wasn't locked. My fingers trembled as I opened the messages. The screen filled with a cascade of texts, each one a dagger to my chest. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing. I'll be free tomorrow afternoon." The messages went back 2 weeks, detailing plans for meetings that had clearly already happened. My heart raced as I scrolled, the evidence mounting with every word. Billy wasn't just a friend. He was someone she had been seeing, someone she had been lying to me about. I felt a surge of anger, hot and blinding, but it was quickly tempered by a cold, sinking realization. This wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was real. My wife had been unfaithful. The trust one had placed in her, the life we had built together, felt like a fragile illusion shattering around me. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I needed proof, something concrete, something I couldn't dismiss as a misunderstanding. With shaking hands, I took screenshots of the messages and sent them to myself. Then I placed the phone back on the nightstand, exactly as I had found it. I sat there for a moment, staring at her. How could she do this? How could she lie to me, day after day, while I thought everything was fine? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more painful than the last. I wanted to shake her awake, to demand answers, to scream at her for betraying me. But I didn't. Instead, I got up, my movements slow and deliberate, and walked out of the bedroom. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water, my hands still trembling. The house was eerily quiet, the silence amplifying the storm raging inside me. I needed to think, to figure out what to do next. But every thought led back to the same place. She had lied to me. She had chosen someone else. I heard the shower turn on upstairs, and I knew she was awake. My mind raced with possibilities.
Should I confront her now?
Should I wait, gather more evidence, or try to understand why this had happened? The uncertainty was paralyzing, but beneath it all was a growing resolve. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't pretend everything was fine. As I stood there, staring at the glass of water in my hand, I realized something. This was the turning point. Whatever happened next would change everything. The life I had known was over, and I had to decide what kind of life I wanted to build from the wreckage. The sound of the shower stopped, and I knew she would be downstairs soon. My heart pounded in my chest, the tension in the air almost unbearable. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. The truth was out there now, and there was no going back. The stage was set for the confrontation, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. The door to the bathroom opened upstairs, and I heard her footsteps on the stairs. My grip tightened on the glass in my hand. The moment was coming, whether I was ready or not. And when it did, nothing would ever be the same. The sound of her footsteps descending the stairs was like a countdown to an explosion. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing the tension that had been building since I'd seen the messages. I set the glass of water down on the counter, my hands trembling slightly, and turned to face the doorway. She walked in, her hair damp from the shower, her face calm and unreadable. For a moment, I just stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman in front of me with the one I thought I knew. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low but firm. It wasn't a request. She froze, her eyes narrowing slightly. "About what?" she asked, her tone cautious but defensive. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "About Billy." Her face went pale, and for a split second, I saw the panic in her eyes. But she recovered quickly, her expression hardening. "What about him?" she asked, crossing her arms over her chest. "Don't," I said, my voice rising. "Don't play dumb with me. I saw the messages. I know what's been going on." She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. 2 weeks, Anne. 2 weeks of texts, of meetings, of lies. How could you do this? How could you lie to me like that? For a moment, she just stared at me, her face a mask of defiance. Then she sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice softer now. "Then tell me what it is." I shot back, my anger flaring. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been cheating on me." She flinched at the word, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she looked away, her arms still crossed tightly over her chest. "It just happened," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't plan it. It wasn't supposed to mean anything." "Not supposed to mean anything?" I repeated, my voice rising again. "You've been sneaking around behind my back for weeks, and you're telling me it didn't mean anything?" "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said, her voice breaking now. "I was just lonely. You've been so distant lately, so wrapped up in work. I didn't know how to talk to you about it. So you decided to talk to him instead?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. You decided the solution was to cheat on me? It wasn't like that, she snapped, her own anger flaring now. You don't understand. You're never here, emotionally or physically. I needed someone who actually paid attention to me, who made me feel wanted. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, my mind reeling. Was this my fault? Had I driven her to this? For a moment, I felt a flicker of guilt, but it was quickly drowned out by the anger and betrayal that had been simmering inside me. So this is my fault? I asked, my voice cold now. You're blaming me for your choices? I'm not blaming you, she said, her voice softer again. I'm just saying, it's not as simple as you're making it out to be. It's pretty simple to me, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. You made a choice, Anne. You chose to lie to me, to betray me, and now you're trying to justify it. She didn't respond, her eyes filling with tears. For a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of her quiet sobs. I wanted to feel sympathy for her, to comfort her, but the anger and hurt were too strong. I'm sorry, she said finally, her voice barely audible. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, I said, my voice breaking now. You did hurt me. And I don't know if I can forgive you for that. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. Please, she said. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I'll end it with Billy. I'll be honest with you from now on. Just give me a chance. I stared at her, my mind racing. Could I forgive her? Could we move past this? The thought of losing her, of ending the life we had built together, was unbearable. But the thought of staying, of trying to rebuild the trust that had been shattered, felt just as impossible. I don't know, I said finally, my voice heavy with emotion. I don't know if I can do this. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand, she said softly. I hope you can find it in your heart to try. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The weight of her betrayal, the pain of her words, was too much. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there, alone. As I stepped outside, the cool morning air hit me like a slap, jolting me back to reality. I didn't know what to do, where to go, or how to process everything that had just happened. But one thing was clear. My life, as I had known it, was over. And whatever came next, it would be nothing like what I had planned. The tension in the air was palpable, the silence between us deafening. I knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something new, something painful and uncertain. And as I stood there, staring at the horizon, I couldn't help but wonder if I had the strength to face it. The house felt different now. Hollow, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, my head in my hands. The room was sparse, just a bed, a dresser, and a single lamp casting a dim glow. It wasn't home anymore. It was a waiting room, a liminal space where I was supposed to decide the rest of my life. I had spent the day in a fog, going through the motions at work, my mind replaying the confrontation with and over. Her tears, her excuses, her plea for another chance, it all swirled in my head like a storm I couldn't escape. But one thought kept breaking through the chaos. I can't stay here. I can't live like this. The decision had been forming in the back of my mind since the moment I saw those messages, but now it was crystal clear. I couldn't trust her. I couldn't rebuild what she had broken. The only way forward was to end it, completely. I stood up, my legs shaky, and walked to the window. The backyard was dark, the patio furniture we'd bought together just a shadow against the night. My chest tightened at the thought of all the plans we'd made, the life we'd built. But staying for the sake of memories wasn't an option. I couldn't live in a house filled with lies and resentment. I deserved better than that. I grabbed my phone and opened a browser, typing in the name of a divorce attorney I'd heard about from a coworker. My fingers hesitated over the screen, but only for a moment. I clicked on the number and dialed, my heart pounding as the line rang. Law offices, a crisp voice answered. "Hi," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I need to speak with someone about filing for divorce." The woman on the other end asked a few questions, her tone professional and detached, and I answered mechanically. Yes, I was married. No, there were no children. No, there was no chance of reconciliation. She scheduled a consultation for the next day and hung up, leaving me standing there with the phone in my hand, the weight of what I'd just done settling over me. I heard footsteps in the hallway, and then Anne appeared in the doorway. She looked smaller somehow, her shoulders hunched, her face pale. "Who were you talking to?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her, trying to memorize the woman I had loved, the woman I thought I knew. "A lawyer," I said finally. "I'm filing for divorce." Her face crumpled, and she took a step back like I'd slapped her. "No," she whispered. "Please, no. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." "It's too late for that," I said, my voice cold. "You made your choice, Anne. Now I'm making mine." She sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands covering her face. "What about us?" she asked, her voice muffled. "What about everything we've built?" "You destroyed that," I said, my voice flat. "And now we have to deal with the consequences." She didn't respond, just sat there, crying quietly. I wanted to feel something, anger, sadness, anything, but all I felt was numb. I turned away from her and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her tears. The house felt even emptier as I moved through it, the familiar spaces now foreign and cold. I stopped in the kitchen, staring at the fridge covered in takeout menus and random magnets we'd collected over the years. One of them was from a trip we'd taken to the coast, a little surfboard with the name of a beachside cafe. I reached out and touched it, my throat tightening. I opened the fridge, more out of habit than hunger, and stared at the contents. A half-empty bottle of wine, some leftovers, a carton of eggs. Normal things, things that belonged to a life that no longer felt real. I closed the door and leaned against the counter, my mind racing. The sound of Anne's footsteps pulled me out of my thoughts. She stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. "I never wanted this," she said, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did," I said, my voice flat. "And now we have to deal with the consequences." She didn't respond, just stood there, crying quietly. I wanted to feel something, anger, sadness, anything, but all I felt was numb. I turned away from her and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her alone in the dim light. The decision was made. There was no going back. And as I sat there in the guest room, staring at the blank wall, I knew the hardest part was yet to come. The house, the life we'd built, the future we'd planned, it was all over. And whatever came next, it would be nothing like what I had imagined. The tension in the air was palpable, the silence between us deafening. I knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something new, something painful and uncertain. And as I sat there, staring at the horizon through the window, I couldn't help but wonder if I had the strength to face it. The first few weeks after the decision were a blur. The house, once filled with the hum of shared life, now felt like a museum of what used to be. And moved out quickly, taking only what she needed, leaving behind the remnants of our life together. Photos on the walls, books on the shelves, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. I didn't stop her. I didn't even watch her go. I just sat in the living room, staring at the blank TV screen, feeling the weight of the silence press down on me. But silence, I soon realized, was a double-edged sword. It gave me space to think, to process, but it also left me alone with the questions that had been gnawing at me since the beginning. How did we get here? Was it my fault? Could I have done something differently? The questions circled endlessly, but the answers never came. I threw myself into work, burying myself in projects and deadlines, anything to keep my mind from wandering back to the past. My coworkers noticed the change. My sharper focus, my longer hours, but no one said anything. They didn't need to. The bags under my eyes and the hollow look in my face told the story well enough. At night, though, when the work was done and the distractions faded, the pain would creep back in. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our relationship, searching for the cracks I must have missed. But the truth was, there were no cracks. Not obvious ones, anyway. Just a slow, steady erosion of trust that I hadn't seen until it was too late. One evening, after another long day at work, I came home to find a box on the porch. It was from Anne. I hesitated before opening it, my hands trembling slightly. Inside were a few of my things she'd taken by mistake: a jacket, a book, a watch I hadn't even realized was missing. At the bottom of the box was a note, written in her familiar handwriting. "I'm sorry," it read, "for everything. I hope one day you can forgive me." I stared at the note for a long time, my chest tight. Part of me wanted to crumple it up and throw it away, to erase her words and the memories they brought with them. But another part of me, a smaller, quieter part, felt a flicker of something like relief. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it, someday. I put the note back in the box and carried it inside, setting it on the kitchen counter. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the urge to run from the pain. Instead, I sat down at the table and let it wash over me, the anger, the sadness, the betrayal. And then, slowly, I began to let it go. The next morning, I woke up early and started cleaning. I took down the photos, packed away the books, opened the windows to let in fresh air. It was strange, seeing the house stripped of its memories, but it also felt freeing. Like I was reclaiming the space, making it mine again. As I worked, I found myself thinking about the future. Not in a concrete way, but in flashes. A new couch, maybe. A fresh coat of paint. A life that wasn't defined by what had happened, but by what could still be. By the time I finished, the house felt different. Lighter, somehow. It wasn't home yet, but it could be. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun set. The air was cool, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. It was peaceful, and for a moment, I let myself just breathe. The pain was still there, of course. It would probably always be there, in some form or another. But it didn't define me. It didn't control me. And as I sat there, watching the colors fade into night, I realized that was enough. The betrayal had hurt me deeply, but it hadn't broken me. And as I looked out at the horizon, I knew that whatever came next, I would be ready for it. Not because I was strong, but because I had learned how to be. And that, I realized, was the most important thing of all.